The wind howled through the empty plains that night, carrying dust and rain across the Turner Ranch. The storm had rolled in without warning, swallowing the stars and turning the land into a dark blur of noise and lightning. Jake Turner pulled his worn coat tighter around his shoulders and stepped out of his cabin with a lantern in hand. He had spent most of his 32 years on this land, caring for horses and cattle, fixing fences, and living a quiet life far away from the noise of cities. But tonight something felt different. There was an uneasy feeling in the air, something he couldn't quite name. The rain started to fall harder, splashing against his boots as he walked toward the barn. His old dog Rusty trotted beside him, barking once and then stopping, ears raised. Jake paused too. Over the sound of thunder, he thought he heard something, a faint rustle like footsteps or movement inside the barn. He frowned. None of his animals made sounds like that. He pushed open the barn door and the warm smell of hay and horses met him. The lantern's light flickered over the stalls. His horses shifted nervously, their eyes wide. He moved slowly, scanning the shadows. That was when he saw her. Behind a stack of hay, half hidden in darkness, was a young woman. She was soaked from the rain, her clothes torn and muddy. Her hair clung to her face and her hands trembled as she tried to back away. Jake froze for a second, too shocked to speak. The woman looked terrified, like a wild animal cornered with nowhere to run. "Who's there?" he asked, his voice firm but calm. The woman pressed herself against the wall and whispered, "Please, don't turn me in." Her voice was soft but full of fear. Jake blinked, lowering the lantern slightly. "Turn you in? What are you talking about?" She didn't answer. Her breathing was fast and uneven. Jake could see her shaking. She looked young, maybe mid-20s, and there were bruises on her arms and a small cut across her cheek. He took a cautious step forward. Rusty growled quietly but stayed beside him. "I'm not going to hurt you," Jake said slowly. "You're safe here. Just tell me who you are and what you're doing in my barn." The woman's lips trembled. "I just needed somewhere to hide. Please, I'll leave in the morning. Don't call anyone." Her words came out broken and desperate. Jake could tell she hadn't eaten in days. There was a hollowness in her eyes, the kind people get when they've been running for too long. "Sit down," he said after a moment. "You look like you're about to fall over." He took off his coat and placed it near her, but she didn't move. Her eyes darted between him and the door. Jake sighed, set down the lantern, and fetched a small blanket from a nearby shelf. "Here," he said, holding it out. "You'll freeze like that." For a few seconds, she didn't respond. Then slowly, she reached out and took the blanket. Her hands were cold, her nails broken. She wrapped it tightly around herself, still watching him with wary eyes. Jake leaned against one of the wooden beams. "You can stay here tonight," he said. "I'll figure out who you are in the morning." Her expression shifted, torn between gratitude and fear. "Thank you," she whispered. "I won't cause trouble." He nodded once and turned toward the door. But before he left, he looked back at her. In the flickering lantern light, her face seemed strangely familiar. He couldn't place where he'd seen her before. But there was something about her eyes, soft, uncertain, yet strong, that tugged at a memory buried deep inside him. When he got back to the cabin, he couldn't sleep. The rain beat against the windows and the wind made the wooden walls creak. Rusty lay near the fire, but even the old dog seemed restless. Jake sat in his chair, staring into the flames, thinking about the woman in the barn. Who was she? Why did she look so scared? He thought about calling the sheriff in the morning, but something inside him resisted. She didn't look like a criminal. She looked lost, like someone who had been through too much. Still, he couldn't ignore the strange feeling that she wasn't telling him everything. Around midnight, the storm eased. The ranch fell quiet again. Jake grabbed his lantern and went back to check the barn one last time. When he opened the door, she was awake, sitting against the wall, holding the blanket close. She looked up quickly, her eyes full of worry. "Couldn't sleep either, huh?" he said softly. She didn't answer, but her shoulders relaxed slightly. Jake noticed she was shivering. He took a small loaf of bread from his pocket. "You should eat something." She hesitated, then took it. Her hand shook as she ate small bites, like she wasn't used to food anymore. After a while, she whispered, "Why are you helping me?" Jake shrugged. "You looked like you needed it." She stared at the floor. "You don't even know who I am." "I don't," he said, "but I can see you're scared. That's enough for me tonight." The silence between them stretched. Then she whispered, almost too softly to hear, "I didn't mean for any of it to happen." Jake frowned. Any of what? Her eyes filled with tears, but she shook her head. It doesn't matter. It's too late. Jake wanted to press her for answers, but the look on her face stopped him. She wasn't ready to talk. Maybe she was afraid of what he'd do if he knew the truth. So he just said, "Get some rest. We'll talk in the morning." When he stepped outside, the first light of dawn was starting to show behind the clouds. The storm had passed, leaving the ground wet and shining under the pale sky. Jake took a deep breath of the cool air and looked out over his land. Everything looked calm, but his mind was far from it. He couldn't shake the image of her, mud-stained, frightened, begging him not to turn her in. And the way she had said it, as if she already knew people were looking for her. Back inside his cabin, Jake poured himself a cup of coffee, his thoughts running wild. He tried to remember where he had seen her before. Maybe at the feed store or the town square, or maybe in an old photograph. But nothing fit. Rusty barked once, and Jake looked toward the window. In the distance, the morning sun was rising, painting the fields in shades of gold and silver. For a moment, he almost convinced himself that everything would make sense soon, but deep down, he knew the peace wouldn't last. The woman in his barn wasn't just a runaway. She was someone with a story, and whether he liked it or not, that story was now part of his life. As he set the empty cup down, Jake decided one thing: he wouldn't turn her in, not yet. Not until he knew what she was running from. The world outside might see her as a stranger, maybe even a criminal. But something about her face, something he couldn't explain, made him believe there was more to it. He didn't know that by choosing to help her that night, he had just opened the door to a past that was about to come rushing back, one that would change both of their lives forever. The next morning, the sky was soft and clear, washed clean by the night storm. The fields around the ranch shimmered with dew, and the smell of wet earth hung in the air. Jake woke early, as he always did, but his mind was not at peace. All night he had thought about the woman in the barn, wondering who she really was and why she looked so broken. He poured himself a cup of coffee, then carried a tray with bread, jam, and warm milk to the barn. As he stepped inside, the horses turned their heads toward him, calm now after the long night. The woman was awake, sitting near the stall door, still wrapped in the blanket he had given her. Her hair was messy and her eyes were red from crying, but she looked a little stronger in the daylight. Jake set the tray down beside her and said quietly, "You should eat." She looked at the food for a few seconds before whispering, "Thank you." He nodded, folding his arms as he watched her take slow bites. "You said you were hiding," he began. "Mind telling me from who?" She hesitated, her eyes moving toward the floor. "From everyone," she said softly. Jake frowned. "That's not an answer." Her voice trembled as she said, "My name is Emily Carter. I used to work at a hospital in town. I was a nurse there." She took a deep breath, her hands tightening around the cup of milk. "There was a fire a few weeks ago. 3 people died. They said I did it. They said I caused it." Jake stared at her, trying to make sense of her words. "You mean, they think you started the fire?" She nodded, tears filling her eyes. "But I didn't. I swear I didn't. I tried to save them. I was there that night because I forgot my necklace in the staff room. When I went back, I smelled smoke. I tried to pull people out, but..." She covered her face with her hands. "They didn't make it. And when the police came, they found my badge near the fire room. They thought it was me." Jake didn't say anything for a while. The only sound was the slow breathing of the horses and the soft rustle of hay. Emily's story didn't sound like a lie. Her pain was too real, too raw. "Why didn't you tell them what really happened?" he asked. "I did," she said quickly. "But no one believed me. The hospital's owner. He's powerful. He said I was careless, that I caused everything. And when I tried to speak up, people started following me. I didn't feel safe anymore. I ran." Jake rubbed his chin, thinking. He remembered hearing something about a hospital fire on the radio a few days ago. A nurse wanted for questioning. Her name had been mentioned once, but he hadn't paid much attention then. Now it seemed the story had found its way to his own barn. He studied her face again. She didn't look like someone capable of hurting anyone. She looked lost, fragile, and haunted. "So you've been running since that night?" he asked. "Yes," she whispered. "I've been sleeping in empty houses, barns, wherever I can. I just need time to prove the truth." Jake sighed, leaning against the wooden wall. "That's a hard thing to do when the whole town's looking for you." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "You believe me?" He hesitated. "I believe you're scared. And I believe you've been through something terrible. That answer made her lower her head, but a faint bit of hope flickered in her eyes. "Thank you for letting me stay," she said quietly. "I'll be gone soon. I don't want to bring trouble to your ranch." Jake looked toward the wide fields beyond the barn door. "You're not going anywhere until you've had a proper meal and some rest," he said firmly. "Running like this will only get you caught." She looked up at him, surprised by his kindness. "You don't even know me." "Maybe not," Jake said, "but I've seen enough people to tell when someone's lying. You don't look like one of them." A small smile appeared on her face for the first time, faint but real. It had been a long time since anyone had shown her kindness. The day passed quietly. Emily helped him brush the horses and feed them, moving carefully as if afraid to break something. She worked with skill, and Jake noticed her gentle hands and patience with the animals. It reminded him of his mother, who had always said, "You can tell a person's heart by the way they treat a frightened creature." As evening came, Jake went inside his cabin to grab an old blanket and some extra clothes. He also opened a drawer he hadn't touched in years. Inside were a few old photographs, faded by time. One of them showed a family, his parents, his older brother, and himself as a boy. But beside them stood a little girl with bright eyes and a ribbon in her hair. He stared at the picture for a long time. That little girl had been a foster child who had stayed with them for a short time many years ago, after a car accident took her parents. Her name had been Emily. Jake's chest tightened as he looked at the picture again. The same eyes. The same gentle face. He stood there in silence, the sound of the ticking clock filling the room. Could it really be her? He went back to the barn, his boots crunching on the gravel. Emily was sitting near the lamp, brushing her wet hair. When she saw him, she smiled weakly. "Feeling better?" he asked. "A little," she said softly. "Thank you for letting me stay." Jake hesitated before speaking. "Emily, did you live here once? A long time ago?" She blinked in confusion. "Here? No. I don't think so." He stepped closer and showed her the photograph. For a moment, she didn't move. Then her eyes widened and her hand went to her mouth. That's me," she whispered. "You're Jake. You gave me that little toy horse." "I remember now." Her voice cracked as the memory hit her. Tears filled her eyes and she reached out to touch the photograph. "I never forgot that toy. It was the first thing anyone ever gave me." Jake felt something heavy lift inside him. The frightened stranger in his barn wasn't a stranger at all. She was part of his past, someone who had once been like a little sister to him. He smiled softly. "You were just a kid then. You disappeared one day and no one told us why?" "I was moved to another home," she said quietly, then to another. Everything kept changing. The air between them grew heavy with emotion. The storm that had brought her to his door suddenly seemed like fate itself. She looked at him through her tears. "I didn't know this was your ranch. I just saw the barn and thought it was empty." Jake nodded slowly. "Well, you found the right one." For the first time since that terrible night at the hospital, Emily let herself breathe deeply. For the first time in weeks, she felt safe. Jake handed her the old blanket. "You should get some sleep," he said. "We'll talk more in the morning. Maybe we can figure out how to fix this." Emily's voice was small and tired. "You really think it can be fixed?" Jake looked out toward the horizon where the last light of day was fading. "I think the truth always finds a way out," he said. "Sometimes it just needs someone to help it along." She smiled faintly, lying down on the blanket. "You haven't changed much," she murmured, her voice fading. "Still trying to save lost things?" Jake chuckled quietly. "Maybe. Or maybe lost things just keep finding me." As she drifted into sleep, Jake sat by the barn door, watching the moon rise over the quiet land. He knew the road ahead would not be easy. If her story was true, powerful people wouldn't stop until she was silenced. But he also knew something else. He couldn't walk away now. He had found her once as a scared child years ago. Now she had come back to him, still scared, still alone. And this time he wasn't going to let her face it alone. Outside, the wind whispered softly across the plains. Inside, the cowboy kept watch, unaware that their past connection was only the beginning of a much bigger truth waiting to unfold. The next morning brought quiet sunlight that filtered through the barn windows, lighting the hay in golden streaks. The air was calm now, filled only with the gentle sound of the horses moving in their stalls. Jake stood outside watching the horizon as he drank his coffee. His mind was restless. He couldn't stop thinking about what he had discovered the night before, that the frightened woman hiding in his barn was the same girl his family had once taken in, years ago. He looked down at the small toy horse he had found in an old box inside the cabin. Its paint was chipped, but it still looked the same as the day he had given it to her. He remembered her laughter back then, how she had followed him around the ranch asking endless questions about horses and storms and sunsets. And now she was back, no longer that bright-eyed child, but a woman haunted by fear. He walked to the barn and pushed the door open gently. Emily was sitting near the window, brushing her hair with her fingers. The morning light made her look softer, almost peaceful. She smiled when she saw him, though her eyes still carried sadness. "You wake up early," she said softly. "Old habits," Jake replied. "You hungry?" She nodded shyly. He handed her a plate with eggs and bread, and for a few minutes they sat in silence. After breakfast, Jake decided to ask what had been weighing on his mind. "Emily, what are you planning to do now?" She looked down at her hands. "I don't know. I can't go to the police. They already think I'm guilty. And if I keep running, they'll find me." Jake leaned against a post. "You said there's proof you didn't do it. Something that can clear your name." Her eyes flickered with a bit of hope. "There was a security camera in the corridor near the fire room. I remember seeing it. But when the investigation started, they said the footage was missing." "Someone erased it," Jake's brow furrowed. "You think someone wanted you blamed?" "I don't think," she said quietly. "I know." Her voice trembled slightly, but her eyes were steady. "The hospital was owned by a man named Charles Green. He's rich, powerful, and cruel. He had been cutting corners, cheap wiring, old equipment, bad safety systems. I warned my supervisor about it. I told them the building wasn't safe, but they told me to stay quiet. And then 2 weeks later, the fire happened." Jake clenched his jaw. The picture was becoming clearer now. "So you were the easy one to blame," he said. Emily nodded. "Yes, the young nurse with no family, no money, no power. They said it was my fault, and Charles made sure the evidence disappeared." For a while, neither of them spoke. The barn was quiet except for the slow rhythm of the horses' breathing. Jake could see how much this had broken her, the weight of lies, the fear of being hunted. He thought of how alone she must have felt, running through nights like last night with no one to trust. He finally said, "You said the footage was erased. Are you sure there's no backup?" Her eyes brightened slightly. "There might be. The camera company stores automatic backups for a week before deleting them. If someone got there fast enough, they could have saved it. I told the police that, but they didn't listen." Jake rubbed his chin. "And where's the company?" "In town," she said. "On West River Street. But it's been 3 weeks now. It might be gone." Jake thought for a moment, then said quietly, "Maybe not. Some people don't delete things as fast as they should." Emily looked at him in surprise. "You'd help me?" Jake met her eyes. "You were a part of my family once. My folks would want me to help you." She smiled faintly, but her eyes glistened with tears. "I don't know what to say." "Don't say anything yet," Jake said. "Just rest today. We'll figure something out tomorrow." But that night, as the sun went down, something felt off. The ranch was too quiet. Even Rusty, his old dog, seemed uneasy. He barked twice toward the road and then growled low. Jake walked to the porch and saw dust rising far away. A vehicle moving toward them. His stomach tightened. Hardly anyone came to his ranch without a reason. He watched as a black truck slowed near the gate. 2 men stepped out, both wearing dark jackets. They looked like law officers, but their badges flashed too quickly to be sure. Jake stayed calm, though his pulse quickened. One of the men called out, "Morning, sir." "You Jake Turner?" "I am," Jake said, his tone steady. "We're looking for a woman," the man said. "Name's Emily Carter. Seen her around?" Jake forced himself not to look toward the barn. "Can't say I have," he replied. "What's she done?" "She's wanted for questioning in a murder and arson case," the man said coldly. "Dangerous type. Might try to hide." Jake kept his face still, but inside he felt a mix of anger and fear. "If she's dangerous, she won't find much help out here," he said. The men looked around the property, their eyes sharp. "Mind if we take a look?" Jake shook his head firmly. "I do mind. You got a warrant?" The men exchanged glances, then turned back toward their truck. "If she shows up, you call us," one said. "Could save you a lot of trouble." When they drove off, Jake didn't waste a second. He hurried to the barn, pushing the door open. Emily was already standing pale and frightened. "They were here," he said. "Two men asking about you." Her voice trembled. "They found me." Jake shook his head. "Not yet. But they will if we stay here." She looked terrified, her hands twisting together. "What do we do?" Jake thought for a moment, then spoke firmly. "You said there might be proof in town. We'll go there tonight. If that footage still exists, it's the only thing that can save you." Emily stared at him. "You'd come with me?" "I'm not letting you go alone," he said simply. "If you get caught, no one will believe you. But if I'm with you, maybe I can help." Tears filled her eyes again. "Jake, you don't have to do this," he gave a small smile. "Yeah, I do. You came back into my life for a reason. Maybe this is it." She nodded slowly, wiping her eyes. "I'm scared," she admitted. He touched her shoulder gently. "You've been scared long enough. It's time to finish this." They packed quickly. Jake saddled his old horse, loaded a few supplies, and made sure Rusty stayed behind to guard the ranch. As they rode out under the stars, the cool night air wrapped around them. The land stretched wide and endless ahead, the sound of the horses' hooves mixing with the soft whisper of the wind. Neither of them spoke for a long time. Emily looked up at the sky, the stars bright above the dark plains. "I used to look at the stars when I was little," she said softly. "I thought they could hear me." Jake smiled faintly. "Maybe they still can." She turned her head toward him, her eyes full of quiet gratitude. "You're the only person who ever believed me." Jake looked ahead, his jaw set. Sometimes that's all someone needs, one person to believe them. They rode through the night, past rivers that shimmered in the moonlight, past sleeping fields and silent trees. Somewhere in the distance, headlights glowed faintly, the black truck searching again. Jake guided the horse off the road and into the woods, waiting for the danger to pass. When the lights faded, they kept moving until the first light of dawn began to rise. The town was still miles away, but Emily's heart felt lighter for the first time in weeks. She wasn't running alone anymore. Jake glanced at her, his expression steady but warm. "Hold on, Emily, we're going to find the truth. And when we do, no one will ever call you a criminal again." She nodded, her voice soft but certain. "I trust you, Jake." And with that, the cowboy and the frightened nurse rode toward the dawn, toward the truth that waited for them, hidden somewhere in the heart of the town. The night air was cold as Jake and Emily rode across the quiet plains. The moon hung low over the horizon, its pale light guiding their way. The road to town stretched far ahead, a ribbon of dust under the stars. Emily held on tightly, her heart pounding with a mix of fear and hope. She had been running for weeks, but this time she wasn't running away. She was running toward the truth. They reached a small creek by dawn and stopped to rest. The horse drank while Jake unpacked a bit of food. Emily sat on a rock, wrapping her arms around herself. "I didn't think I'd ever come back here," she whispered. Jake looked at her. "Sometimes you have to face where it all started," he said. "Even if it hurts," she nodded slowly. The sky was turning orange, the world waking up around them. Birds began to sing, and for a short moment it felt peaceful. But Emily knew the peace wouldn't last. The men in the black truck were still out there. They would keep looking. By mid-morning, they reached the edge of town. Jake stopped the horse behind an old gas station, out of sight from the main road. He handed her his hat and said, "Keep your head low. Don't let anyone see your face." Emily did as he said, pulling the hat down to shade her eyes. Her hands shook slightly as they walked toward the small building with faded blue letters, River Tech Security Systems. It looked quiet, too quiet. The front door was locked, but the blinds were half open. Inside, rows of dusty computer equipment and filing cabinets filled the room. Jake knocked on the door. After a few seconds, an older man appeared from the back, wearing glasses and holding a mug of coffee. He looked surprised to see them. "Sorry, we're closed today," he said. Jake spoke calmly. "We just need to ask about some old security footage from the hospital fire 3 weeks ago." "It's important," the man frowned. "You police?" "No," Jake said. "But we're looking for the truth. Someone's life depends on it." The man hesitated, looking at Emily. She kept her head low, but he could see the fear in her posture. After a pause, he sighed. "Come in, quick. And lock the door behind you." Inside, the smell of old coffee and paper filled the air. The man sat at his desk and pushed his glasses up. "You're talking about the Green Valley Hospital fire, right?" Emily nodded. Her voice was soft. "Yes, I used to work there. I think there was a backup video." The man rubbed his chin. We handled that system, yeah. When the fire happened, I got a call from one of their managers to erase all recent footage, said it was for insurance reasons. It sounded strange to me, so I made a copy before deleting it. Emily's breath caught. You have it? He nodded slowly. I never got around to wiping my backup drive. It's in the back room. Jake's eyes met Emily's, and for the first time in days, hope flickered bright between them. The man went into the back and returned with a small hard drive. He plugged it into his old computer, the screen flickering to life. He clicked through folders until a grainy black and white video began to play. The timestamp showed the night of the fire. They all leaned closer. Smoke filled the hallway, alarms flashing. People were running. Then in the lower corner of the frame, a man in a suit appeared near the electrical panel, Charles Green himself. He was holding something small, metallic. Sparks flew and flames burst from the wall. The man ran, covering his face. Emily gasped softly, her hand over her mouth. That's him, she whispered. That's Charles Green. Jake clenched his fists. He started it, the man nodded grimly. Looks that way. He blamed you to cover himself. Emily's eyes filled with tears. Can you make a copy of that video? I'll burn it to a disk, he said. But you better be careful. If he finds out you have this, he'll come after you. Just as he said that, a car engine rumbled outside. Jake froze. He peeked through the blinds and saw it, the same black truck parked across the street. Two men stepped out, scanning the area. They found us, Jake said quietly. The older man looked worried. You need to go out the back. Take the alley and head toward the old bus station. You'll lose them there. Jake grabbed the disc as soon as it finished burning. He thanked the man quickly, and he and Emily slipped out through the back door. The alley was narrow and filled with garbage bins. Their footsteps echoed softly as they hurried through it. Behind them, voices shouted and doors slammed. The men were close. Emily's heart pounded. Jake, they're coming. Keep moving, he said firmly, leading her down another street. They ran through the maze of back roads, trying to stay hidden. But the black truck turned the corner fast, headlights sweeping across the alley. Jake grabbed Emily's hand and pulled her behind an old delivery van. They crouched low as the men passed, their boots crunching on gravel. One of them said, They were here.
Split up.
When they were gone, Jake looked at her. We need to get to that bus station before they find us. They ran again, the sound of pursuit echoing behind them. Finally, they reached the old station on the edge of town. The place was abandoned, windows broken, paint peeling off the walls. But inside it was quiet. Jake closed the door and caught his breath. We'll wait here for a bit. Then we'll go to the sheriff with the video. Emily sat on a bench, trembling. What if he doesn't believe us? He will, Jake said firmly. Once he sees that footage, there's no denying the truth. She nodded, tears glistening in her eyes. I can't believe it's almost over, she whispered. But just as she said that, the sound of footsteps echoed outside. Jake's body tensed. He drew his knife instinctively, his eyes scanning the shadows. The door creaked open and one of the men from the truck stepped in, holding a flashlight. Jake motioned for Emily to stay still. The man moved slowly, his light sweeping across the dusty floor. When he turned his back, Jake stepped forward and struck him hard across the arm, knocking the flashlight away. The man stumbled and Jake pushed him against the wall. Where's your boss? Jake demanded. The man glared. You don't know what you're getting into, cowboy. Jake didn't reply. He tossed the man's radio aside and pulled Emily toward the back door. They slipped out again, disappearing into the growing daylight. They found a small roadside diner a mile away. The waitress looked surprised to see two strangers so early, but she didn't ask questions. They sat in the corner, breathing hard. Emily clutched the disc tightly in her hand. We have the proof now, she said. We can end this. Jake looked at her, his expression calm but proud. You did it, Emily. You faced your fear. She smiled faintly. I couldn't have done it without you. Outside, police sirens began to echo in the distance. Jake looked out the window, his heart racing. Looks like the truth's catching up fast, he said. He paid for the coffee and they stepped outside, ready to face whatever came next. The sun had risen high now, painting the plains in golden light. For the first time in weeks, Emily didn't feel like she was running anymore. Jake looked at her and said quietly, No matter what happens next, you're not alone anymore. Emily smiled through tears. I know. And together they walked toward the sheriff's office, carrying the evidence that would change everything. The sun was climbing high in the sky as Jake and Emily walked toward the sheriff's office. The dusty road shimmered under the light and every step felt heavier than the last. Emily held the disc close to her chest, afraid that at any second someone might try to take it away. Her heart beat fast, but there was something new inside her now. Hope. After weeks of fear and hiding, she was finally about to tell her truth. Jake walked beside her, calm and steady. His clothes were dusty and his face looked tired, but his eyes stayed sharp. He had lived through storms before, both on the land and in his heart, but this one mattered more than any. This was about justice. When they reached the sheriff's building, Jake opened the door for her. Inside, the air was cool and smelled faintly of coffee and paper. The sheriff, a tall man with gray hair and a serious face, looked up from his desk. "Morning, Jake," he said slowly. "What brings you to town?" Jake took off his hat. "Sheriff, we need to talk. It's about the hospital fire." At the mention of those words, the sheriff's expression changed. "That case again?" he said, frowning. "It's closed. They're still looking for that nurse." Jake stepped aside and Emily came forward, her hands shaking slightly. The sheriff's eyes widened when he saw her. You're Emily Carter," he said in disbelief. "You're wanted for arson." Emily's voice trembled, but she stood straight. "I didn't do it, sir. I have proof. Please just watch this." Jake handed the disc to the sheriff. "This shows who really started the fire. You'll want to see it before making any decisions." The sheriff hesitated, then called in his deputy and played the footage on his computer. The room fell silent as the grainy video filled the screen. Smoke filled the hospital hallways. Then Charles Green appeared just as they had seen before near the electrical panel. The spark, the fire, the panic, it was all there. When the video ended, no one spoke for several seconds. The sheriff leaned back in his chair, his face pale. "Good Lord," he whispered. "That's Green himself." Emily's eyes filled with tears. "He blamed me. He said I left the machines on. I lost everything because of his lies." The sheriff rubbed his temples. "I remember you, Miss Carter." "Everyone did. We all thought you vanished because you were guilty. But now," he looked at Jake, "where did you find this?" Jake answered quietly. "An honest man kept a copy. We were lucky." The sheriff nodded slowly, his tone serious now. "You've done the right thing bringing this here. We'll issue a warrant for Green right away." He stood up and looked directly at Emily. "You're cleared of suspicion, Miss Carter. I'm sorry for what you've been through." Tears rolled down Emily's cheeks as relief washed over her. It felt like 100 pounds had been lifted from her shoulders. For the first time in weeks, she could breathe freely again. Jake placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. "It's over, Emily," he said softly, but she shook her head, wiping her eyes. "Not yet. He needs to face what he did. The people who died, they deserve justice," the sheriff nodded. "And they'll get it?" "My deputies are already on their way to his estate." A few hours later, word spread quickly through the small town. Charles Green, the powerful businessman everyone respected, had been arrested. The same man who had walked the streets with pride was now sitting in the back of a police car, his head low. Reporters gathered near the station, asking questions, but Emily stayed inside, away from the noise. She sat by the window, staring out at the street where life carried on as usual. Jake sat across from her, sipping his coffee quietly. "You did it," he said, breaking the silence. Emily turned to him, her eyes red but peaceful. "No, Jake, we did it. If it wasn't for you, I'd still be hiding in the dark." He smiled faintly. "Guess the old cowboy had one more ride left in him." She laughed softly through her tears. "You never gave up on me, not even when everyone else did." Jake looked thoughtful. "I think some things are worth holding on to. You were one of them." Later that evening, the sheriff came back with news. "Green confessed," he said. "He admitted to starting the fire to claim insurance money. He thought no one would ever find the proof." Emily felt tears come again, but this time they were tears of relief. "Thank you," she whispered. The sheriff nodded. "You're free to go wherever you want, Miss Carter, but I'd say the town owes you an apology." When the sheriff left, Emily turned to Jake. "I don't even know what to do now. I've been running for so long that I forgot what peace feels like." Jake smiled gently. "Then maybe it's time you remembered. You could stay here for a while. The ranch is quiet and you could use some rest." She looked at him with surprise. "You mean that?" "Of course," he said simply. "You'll always have a place here." The following days passed peacefully. Emily helped Jake on the ranch, feeding the horses, fixing fences, and cooking meals in the small kitchen. The wide-open land healed her in ways she didn't expect. Each sunrise felt like a new beginning. Each sunset like a promise that the worst was behind her. Sometimes Jake would catch her standing at the edge of the field, watching the horizon. Her hair would move with the wind, and for the first time her face showed calm instead of fear. One afternoon she found the little toy horse sitting on the table. She picked it up and smiled. "You still kept this," she said softly. Jake nodded. Didn't have the heart to throw it away. She ran her fingers along its chipped paint. "It always made me feel safe. When I was a kid, it reminded me that someone cared." Jake looked at her with warmth in his eyes. "You were family back then. You still are." Emily blinked back tears. "You have no idea what that means to me." Weeks later, the sheriff visited again. He brought papers proving Emily's full clearance and a letter from the hospital board. They wanted to apologize publicly and offered her job back if she ever wanted it. Emily held the papers in her hands and thought for a long time. "I don't think I can go back there," she said quietly. "Too many bad memories," Jake nodded. "You don't have to. You can start fresh." She smiled, looking out over the golden fields. "Maybe I will." That evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills, they sat together on the porch. The air was warm, filled with the sound of crickets and the distant whinny of a horse. Emily broke the silence first. "Do you ever think things happen for a reason?" Jake thought for a moment. "Sometimes I do. Sometimes I think life just circles back to where it's meant to be." She smiled. "Maybe that's what this was. I ran for so long and somehow I ended up back with the only person who ever made me feel safe." Jake looked at her gently. "Maybe that's life's way of setting things right." She leaned her head on his shoulder, and for the first time in a long time, her heart felt light. The fear, the guilt, the loneliness, it was all fading away. The stars began to appear above them one by one, bright against the darkening sky. "I used to wish on the stars when I was a little girl," she whispered. "I always wished for a family." Jake smiled softly. Maybe they finally answered. The night grew still, the kind of quiet that only wide country land could hold. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called, and the wind rustled the dry grass. Jake looked up at the sky, feeling a peace he hadn't known in years. For a long time, neither of them spoke. They didn't need to. The silence between them said enough. It spoke of trust, of forgiveness, and of the kind of bond that only comes from surviving something together. As dawn approached, Emily stood by the fence, watching the light spread across the fields. She turned to Jake and said softly, "Thank you for believing me when no one else did." Jake smiled, his voice calm and kind. "It wasn't hard to believe you, Emily. I just saw the same little girl who once smiled because of a toy horse." She laughed quietly, her eyes bright with emotion. "I guess some things never change," he nodded. "And some things finally do." The sun rose high, painting the land in gold once again. The cowboy and the girl who had once been lost stood side by side, no longer running from the past. The truth had set her free, and it had brought both of them something even greater. Peace, trust, and the quiet comfort of knowing that even in a world full of lies, kindness and courage could still make things right.